is less than 88%, then it's probably unlikely you'll come off oxygen. Now, some people need oxygen mostly when they're exercising, and some people are okay at rest. But again, if you're sort of in like what I would call steady state, meaning it's just you haven't been in the hospital or you haven't been sick recently, and you go to a clinic visit and they go, wow, your oxygen level's low, there's a good chance you're going to stay on oxygen forever. Pulmonary rehab is going to make how you use oxygen more efficient. It's going to improve your cardiovascular fitness, but it may not help how the lungs take up the oxygen. If you have sort of some chronic lung issues like bad emphysema or COPD, pulmonary rehab is not going to improve that kind of gas exchange, and you may be stuck on oxygen for life. All right. So, okay, hold on. Let me just move my cursor. All right. So the next question was, will pulmonary rehab stop my COPD from getting worse? So the important thing to know about pulmonary rehab is it's really improving your cardiovascular fitness. And that's a fancy way of saying it's making the heart pump more efficiently, and how you extract oxygen into the muscles more efficient. Okay, so it's not going to stop your COPD from getting worse. It's going to make your COPD, make your ability to use oxygen with lungs that are challenged from long-term tobacco use. It's going to make them perhaps work a bit better in the sense that the blood being pumped to the lungs better. But COPD, the way to think about this is if you are a current smoker and you stop smoking, this is going to prevent your COPD from getting worse. If you quit smoking a long time ago and you feel like your lungs are getting worse, some of that has to do with just the fact that every year you get older, you lose some amount of your lung function, okay? It's just how everything gets a little bit worse as we get older. Your knees feel a little more achy, even though you're not, a star athlete anymore. And, your skin is a little more droopy. And again, the only way to make it droop less is to inject Botox into it. So everything is getting a little bit worse as you age. And so you lose some lung function. So even though you may not be getting worse in terms of your COPD, you kind of feel like you're getting a little bit worse because you continue to lose lung function as a function of age. Now, the other thing that's going to stop your COPD from getting worse is getting on top of flare-ups, meaning if you have an infection that makes your breathing a lot worse, the quicker you get on top of things, the better. So how do you do that? Well, get your vaccines if you're not vaccinated. Make sure you've got some type of plan to treat exacerbations. Keep active like you're doing in pulmonary rehab. Eat well. Do all the things that make sense that are going to keep you healthy, and that's going to keep your COPD in check as best you can. All right. So next question was, can chlorine from swimming pools outside cause an exacerbation? So chlorine, when it is a gas and it's going to be kind of hovering up at the top of the pool, right where you pop up to take a breath, there's going to be some chlorine gas. So yes, if you are someone who's affected by chlorine, it could cause a COPD flare-up. Clearly, swimming pools outdoors are better than swimming pools indoors because there's a much better ventilation system for the gas. But the important thing is swimming is an excellent form of exercise. And so not everybody is bothered by chlorine. So if you are someone who notices when you swim that your breathing is worse, maybe you're affected by the chlorine. So don't stop swimming just because of this question. If you're someone who enjoys getting into the pool and you can do laps or water aerobics, keep doing it. But if you notice every time you get out of the pool, your breathing is worse, you may be one of those people who the chlorine gas affects them. Okay. All right. So the next question was, can allergies, colds, or flu cause an exacerbation? And absolutely, it can. And there are many things, and I'll have another slide that goes into that also. But so allergies and colds and flu, what they do is they cause inflammation in the lungs, in the sinuses and down into the lungs. You make more mucus, the airways get inflamed, and then it can make it harder to breathe, which in turn causes an exacerbation or a flare-up of your lung disease. So there are many things that can cause COPD exacerbations. And again, what does that mean? That means you have a flare-up of your underlying lung disease. You are having a harder time breathing, you're coughing more, you have more mucus production. The number one cause of that is going to be viral infections, and that's just because there are a lot of viruses out in the community. The next thing is going to be bacterial infections. Some people, it's a change in the temperature, whether it's very cold or it's very humid, can make people flare up their lung disease. This summer, we had a lot of pollutants in the air because of the fires coming from Canada. That really affected a lot of people's breathing. And basically, a very stressful event can also kind of stress the whole body and can cause a flare of your COPD. And then sometimes there's an overlap if you have underlying heart issues like congestive heart failure, or you have an arrhythmia of your heart, that can in turn lead to some worsening of your breathing and feel like a flare of your COPD. So again, lots of things can cause flare-ups, but going back to the original question, allergies, absolutely. So getting on top of your allergies, if you're allergic to cats and you're going to visit a friend who has a cat, maybe they should come visit you rather than go into that house. So there are things in the environment that can definitely make breathing worse for people who already have compromised lung function. All right. So this was a question that is non-medical, but is a really good one. What are ways to keep a home exercise program enjoyable? So I think one of the biggest things that happened since this pandemic was the ability to do things through Zoom, which is equivalent of what we're doing right now, except it's a different platform of being able to chat with people online. And so there are many programs that you can do through the Y, through your community ed, where there are exercise programs and they're doing them online. And so if you enjoy sort of this forum where you can be motivated by someone online, that's one way of doing it. Other ways to keep it enjoyable is to set up your treadmill in front of the TV, turn the TV on and watch some funny show while you're walking. Books on tape, you can get them from the library. You can get them downloaded onto your Android or your phone, and you can listen to books on tape. Something to distract you sometimes is a good thing. I try to get out there and run regularly, and I like entertainment also, so I will put a book on tape or listen to a podcast while I'm running, okay? The other thing that keeps exercise enjoyable and more likely to motivate you is if there's some type of instructor. Just like at pulmonary rehab, you've got Chris and Beth kind of cracking the whip, telling you what to do. That helps. The other thing is just to be consistent and committed and kind of go, I got to do something every day. And if you can't get it to every day and it's 4 or 5 days a week, that's great. But we are creatures of habits. So once you start doing something, you're more likely to keep doing it, but you've got to be consistent with it. And so I think that's maybe a way to keep home exercise enjoyable. And again, with where we are with the pandemic and new variants and all this going on, sometimes it's just simply safer to exercise at home rather than at a gym. So, and this segues to the same question, what are ways to get more motivated to do this? And I think if you've got a friend goes a long way, because maybe every other day one of you doesn't want to exercise, but if you can find a friend to do something with and plan it, you're more committed. You really want to have goals. I think you got to sometimes just take the leap and get off the couch and start doing something. And so if you're someone who ever thought that, maybe you enjoy dancing, then join a Zumba class or do something online with Zumba. And if they're hiking clubs, if you like to walk, and they're yoga classes and water aerobics, you want to find something that you actually enjoy, and that'll help motivate you to keep doing it. I think really a really good way is if you have a buddy system and you've got a friend that you can exercise with. And then some people are motivated through competition. Sometimes groups say, well, whoever can log in the most steps in a month can win a prize. Sometimes that motivates people to exercise. But again, everybody has their own triggers and their own ways that they're motivated. But I think, again, I would say one of the biggest ways is to just say, what do I enjoy doing? And rather than saying, I enjoy nothing but sitting on the couch, there's got to be something you actually enjoy. And then find that class that you can sign up for online, or a friend you can walk with at the mall in the winter or in the summer. Walking with a friend, I think, can go a long way. Or a spouse. It doesn't have to be a friend. It can be a spouse or a kid, one of your children, adult children that are willing to do that with you. Okay. So I threw in a few questions from previous lectures that have been given, because people almost always ask this question, but nobody in your group did, so I threw it up there. It's a very common question why people want to know, I'm short of breath, but when I put the SAT monitor on my finger, my numbers are fine. And why is there a disconnect between there? And so the most important thing to know is that shortness of breath is not always triggered by a low oxygen, especially if your lungs aren't normal. So if I went to Colorado and went to 12,000 feet, I'm going to be short of breath, but there's less oxygen for me to breathe. But at sea level, where we are in Minnesota, that's not the issue. So what's really happening is how your lung mechanics work is what's making you feel more short of breath, is one of the big things. So if you start to exercise or are moving, you start taking bigger breaths. And if you have significant COPD, sometimes what you're trying to do is push out those breaths that you've inhaled. And if you can't get all the air out before your body's triggering you to take another breath, sometimes the air gets trapped in your lungs, and then that makes the sensation of shortness of breath. And the other thing that's happening is sometimes the diaphragms, if your lungs are really expanded because you have significant emphysema, your diaphragms don't work as well as they should. And so again, once you start moving and you start taking deeper breaths, you simply can't get all that air out. And so you start trapping air inside your lungs, which gives you a sensation of shortness of breath. And again, that has nothing to do with oxygen saturation. So one is a mechanical problem with just breathing, the mechanics of breathing, and the other one is truly gas exchange. So that's why your SAT monitor may look completely normal, and as soon as you start to exercise or move, you're like, I can't breathe. Some of it also has to do with how you're delivering that oxygen to the muscles is not as efficient. And so when the muscles feel that they're not having that oxygen delivered as well, you get a signal that you're short of breath, which is going to make you slow down. Okay, so the important thing to know is that SAT monitor, all it's telling you is it's measuring the amount of oxygen bound to a hemoglobin molecule. It's not telling you how the mechanics of your lungs are working. And that's why often there's a disconnect between saturations and how you feel. Okay? All right, what's going on here? Here we go. And then I have one other question I threw in here. People often want to know, what's actually the difference between COPD and emphysema and pulmonary fibrosis? I think a lot of the people in pulmonary rehab right now have COPD, but there are a lot of these other diseases that sometimes overlap or get you to the pulmonary rehab program. So COPD means chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and it's generally caused by smoking in this country. It's caused in other countries where they burn a lot of fossil fuels, like in Africa. It's going to be caused by burning of fossil fuels, maybe in a mud hut. Okay, but generally, most of COPD in this country is caused by smoking. It's a problem in the tiny little windpipes, okay? The little windpipes get inflamed and it gets really difficult to breathe because you can't get the air out because it's like you're breathing through a straw. The inflammation causes increased mucus production and sort of this chronic irritation in the lungs. So it's happening in the actual windpipes, not in the sacs, okay? Now, emphysema actually involves the little air sacs, okay? And emphysema means that the little air sacs are getting destroyed. So this is what can impair gas exchange when the air sacs are getting destroyed. So this is commonly seen in COPD, but not everybody with COPD has emphysema, okay? So if you look at this, I have a picture here of a CAT scan, and you can see on this is sort of a slice through the lungs. If I were to put my hand right here, this is a slice going right through the chest, looking at the lungs. And this, where I think you can see my cursor, you can see that there are these kind of holes, these black holes on the edge of the lung. Those are what emphysema looks like. And so, again, if you were to think about a perfect meshwork, and you took a lady's pantyhose and you were to stretch it, you would see these tiny little holes everywhere. They're intricate and they're symmetric. And that's what a normal lung would look like. And now if you bought a pair of fishnet stockings, which has big gaping holes in it, that's like someone who has emphysema, okay? So again, that's someone who would have emphysema would be on the CT on the left. Now, pulmonary fibrosis is an actual scarring pattern of the lung. So it's not the windpipes and it's not the air sacs. It's actually the meshwork of tissue that keeps the windpipes and the air sacs all together, okay? And so it's the space in between where a little air sac is and a blood vessel that runs next to the windpipe gets scarred. And so typically pulmonary fibrosis is not a smoking-related lung disease, but there are some people who have both COPD and pulmonary fibrosis, but cigarette smoking doesn't cause pulmonary fibrosis. And again, what you'll see here is you'll see this white stuff on the edge that looks kind of like a honeycomb, and that's all the scar tissue on the edge of the lung. And so that's what pulmonary fibrosis looks like. All right. And I have another picture here just to kind of, again, emphasize. So if these are your lungs, this is a little diagram of what a lung would look like. And these are the windpipes, and they're coming into these little air sacs, which are sort of an intricate meshwork of little sacs all together, and blood vessels that run right next to it. Someone with emphysema is losing a lot of those little sacs, and it's kind of turning into like a little bag. And so gas exchange and oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange gets impaired when you have emphysema. Okay. So I know that was a lot to take in, but just again to try separate what emphysema looks like versus a normal lung. Okay. And so that's all the questions I have. And so I thought I would just open it up for other questions. And I think the easiest thing is to like unmute yourself and then ask a question. So yeah, go ahead. But you're going to have to unmute yourself.
Oh, I thought I did.
Say it again. Go ahead and unmute and ask again.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. My question is, can you explain to me how low oxygen affects our organs and our ability to function,
Sure.
you know, specifically?
Sure.
If I'm at 88%, how does that affect my organs?
Sure. So the good news is 88% isn't critically low. But what we do know, so the body uses oxygen. It's a molecule that's used in something called metabolism, how the body functions. Okay, and so if every organ in the body uses oxygen, if your oxygen level is low, your body is going to be, for better or for worse said, starved for oxygen, which means the muscles don't work very well because they need to extract the oxygen to go into this very intricate pathway where it's used to ultimately make energy for the body to work. So if you don't have enough of that, what can happen is the best way to say, the electrolytes in your body and the pH that keeps you from being too acidic in your blood starts becoming a problem. And then if you simply don't have enough oxygen, the equivalent that can happen is that each organ can get starved for oxygen. So the best way to think about it is kind of like your body's having a stroke. Like your brain, if it's starved for oxygen, you will start to kill neurons. Those are your nerve cells. And your same thing can happen. You can start killing off the cells that need oxygen to function. So if you think about someone who's had a cardiac arrest and for a period of time they have no oxygen flowing at all, the organs like the brain that get no oxygen before the heart gets started again, the brain cells actually die. They just stop working. All right. And you don't grow new brain cells. It's kind of like you've had a big stroke. The tissue dies if it doesn't get oxygen. So the way to think about as your oxygen level drops, your body gets starved for oxygen. And so your thinking may not be as good. And how your lungs are performing, how your heart is performing, you could trigger a heart attack if there wasn't enough oxygen going through the arteries that are going to your heart. And so each organ can suffer in that way. Now, if you're just marching along and you're a little bit low, but not too low, not to a point where you're going to actually cause cells to die, you might just not function quite as well. So you might be a little bit confused. You may not think quite as well. You may not be able to do as much, like walking and doing an activity. Your body's going to say, nope, you can't do that, because as you exercise, you start extracting more and more oxygen. And if there isn't oxygen for you to use, your body's going to say, I can't do that. And so you're just going to feel crampy and icky that you can't exercise because your oxygen's low. So hopefully that kind of that's a huge subject to cover, but I'm trying to make it practical in terms of what does it mean when you're, on the treadmill or on a bicycle.
So if you have a little sleep apnea and you're breathing stopping for 10 seconds every hour or something like that, does that same issue hold true, that
yeah, so
for that period of time you would be starving your organs? Or
yeah, so what we've learned from people with sleep apnea, and if it's been going on for a long time and it's not noticed, if you were to take pictures of their brains over time, what you'll see is you can see a lot of these tiny little strokes that have happened. And presumably it's from very low oxygen while you're sleeping at night. Now, your organs don't need a lot of oxygen at nighttime. You simply need more when you're more active during the day. But at nighttime, the main organ that's going to be particularly unhappy when your oxygen level drops is going to be your heart and your brain.
okay.
So if you look at people who have had long-standing undiagnosed sleep apnea and their oxygen levels being going really low repeatedly at nighttime, they may even if they're on CPAP, still feel tired, or they may show some evidence of some small strokes that have happened because of constantly repeated episodes of low oxygen at nighttime.
Okay.
And these aren't the kind of strokes where you have a mouth droop or your body's weak, but it all has to do with sort of higher processing. And so just your ability to think and process complicated stuff is less. Okay.
Thank you.
So people can unmute and ask questions if they have any.
Yes, could I ask a question?
Yeah.
I really, this is the first time I've had one of these video conferences, and I'm going to rehab today. I smoked for many years and I stopped in 96. And I really don't want to say how many I smoked, but it was doctors, when they examined me, they listened again to make sure I'm not dead. It was probably over 5 packs a day.
Oh.
And I've got good results, I think, from the rehab and pulmonary doctor, Dr. Calvin, I saw.
Mhm.
And she also diagnosed me with asthma,
Okay,
which I didn't really realize that I had before. And I just want to thank everybody and you for all of the questions that they asked. This is such a unique process for me to go through that I found it very helpful. And I'll think of a lot more questions to ask in the future.
sounds good.
If
Thank
they have
you.
another one. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Nothing else? All right. Well, exercise hard. Get as much as you can out of it. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry I waited till the very, very end, but I also want to say thank you. And I asked 2 questions and you answered them so nicely and you gave me lots of ideas and it makes me feel much better. So
Good.
thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Yeah, and you guys are great. And Beth is so patient with me.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah,
All right. You guys have a wonderful day.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, doctor.
know.